for most people, failure is part of learning. What's going to happen the first time you don't succeed on something? How do we respond to that? If we are living up to our values, it will make a big difference. I say that we have to be like Sherpas on a mountain. We have to be capable. We can't climb the mountain for you, but we can climb it with you. And if we've done our job right, we've been able to climb that mountain before. So we know basically the obstacles you're going to come into, and we will design an experience that will help you get to the top of that mountain by watching you.
Have you ever noticed that some of the best ideas come from unexpected places? Your next breakthrough may come from a leader facing similar challenges, but in a completely different sector. Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop. Join us as we explore how today's successful leaders inspire, influence, and connect with others. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board, who have teamed up to spotlight how great leaders and communicators are making their impact in the world. This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. As a proud GW graduate myself, I can attest that faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Dr. Greg Fowler. Gregory W. Fowler, PhD, is president of the University of Maryland Global Campus, Maryland's largest provider of post-secondary education, the country's most transfer-friendly university, and the premier learning partner of the U.S. military, both stateside and abroad. Greg has a very long bio, but here are three things that I think that you should know about him. Number one, he's a nationally recognized leader in developing innovative learning models and experiences for adult and non-traditional populations. He served on the leadership teams that built what are now the two largest universities in America, both of which serve non-traditional students in non-traditional ways. And that is a topic we're going to spend a lot of time on. Number two, formerly a professor of literature and American studies, Dr. Fowler received 2 Fulbright Awards to Germany and Belgium, where he collaborated with students, faculty, and lawmakers on the future of the European Union and the impact of the Bologna Accords. He also taught at the John F. Kennedy Institute for North American Studies at Freie Universität Berlin. Number 3, Dr. Fowler holds an undergraduate degree from Morehouse College, which included 2 years as a Charles A. Dana Scholar at Duke University, a master's degree in English from George Mason University, an MBA from Western Governors University, and a PhD in English American Studies from the State University of New York at Buffalo. He was granted an honorary doctorate and Alumni of the Year award by George Mason University and has completed programs in higher education administration and executive leadership and negotiation from the Harvard University Graduate School of Education and Business School, respectively. Dr. Fowler, we've established your bona fides as a leader, as a scholar, as a global citizen. You've been called everything from doctor and president to alumnus of the year. Today, we're thrilled to call you Chief Influencer. Welcome.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm really excited to be a part of the show.
Well, I am really so excited to dive in today. And where I wanted to start is, I know you're leading a transformation at the University of Maryland Global Campus that aligns the entire learning journey with the needs and expectations of what are called non-traditional populations and the global workforce. In higher education, we hear that term non-traditional a lot, non-traditional students, non-traditional learning. But I just want to ask you, what is traditional these days? Is non-traditional becoming the new normal?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. And it's a great way to start off this conversation because I would say there are questions in there. One is, what is a non-traditional student? And the second question is, what is college? And the first part of that really is when we think about traditional students, really about 1 out of every 6 students in America is a part of what we would consider that traditional college population. That is a residential experience, going to a school that's going to have sports teams and fraternities interested in, and, living in a dorm, those types of things. The vast majority of people who are living through various types of learning experiences now are of a different type. They tend to be either commuter students, they tend to live somewhere else. There are certainly a lot of adult students, 25 years or older. And certainly one of the populations we spend most of our time with are students who either took a non-traditional path, i.e. I left 18 years. When I became 18, I joined the military, or I decided to go back to school later on. And all of those students have different needs than people who are trying to have that coming of age, a rite of passage experience that we think about when we've seen so much in movies. But the second side of that is really, what is college? And college isn't one thing, and this is one of the things we talk a lot about, certainly with legislators and certainly with other people across the country. You certainly have the Ivy League experience, you've got the community college experience, you've got HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions and tribal colleges. They serve different purposes, and different types of students choose to go to different types of schools. Even within the system of Maryland, we've got 3 HBCUs, we've got a number of R1 research top institutions, but we've also got institutions like UMGC that are trying to think about other populations as well. So part of the challenge is making sure that as we are having these conversations, we know which job we're trying to complete and which population we're trying to serve as we move forward. And UMGC is very proud to be a part of that, but in a way that may not necessarily be the same as some of the others.
Yeah. It kind of surprises me when you say that only 1/6 of the students are kind of what most people probably think of, right? That age group and that residential on campus. 5/6. Then, like, vast majority, as you said, are in this bucket we call non-traditional. And I wonder if, despite the fact that they make up the majority, these non-traditional students may feel kind of like outsiders in the system because we've all been sort of trained, through media and maybe through experiences of people we know of what that experience is. And for folks who may feel like they don't belong because they aren't part of, that traditional approach, even though it's much smaller than many people realize, I wonder how you make sure that they know there's a place for them at your institution, at the institutions that you've spent time leading.
One of the things that's true about the whole idea of people not feeling like they belong is that a lot of even the regulatory definitions that we talk about often talk about these populations that are what they consider the traditional ones. The best example I can give you of that is what we call IPED data that the departments of education and others try to collect. It's really based around first time in college students. And so when you look at a lot of statistics and you begin to say, so who are these students? Where do they graduate from? All those types of things. And the regulations and the environment caters to them. It also means that a lot of the policies and practices aren't really thinking about students who are in those other populations. So think about how much learning we have to do right now. We're all talking about things like machine learning and AI right now, but we're certainly talking about World Wide Webs and technology services and other things. We learn so much after, even if for those who went through a traditional experience, we learn so much more after those years. And now the workforce is demanding so many new different skills that it shouldn't be that surprising to people that the populations that really need the most learning, who are involved in learning experience, are that of the population because they make up the large number of the workforce for the most part. When we're trying to think about the workforce and the students who are coming to us, we're trying to think about how do we intentionally design those experiences. So whether it is what are the needs of parents who have kids who are also trying to learn, what are the needs of military, we spend a lot of time trying to understand and design experiences and policies and learning resources in ways that take them into consideration, and making sure that wherever possible, we include those populations as part of our teams and our workforce as well. So that when they're talking to when someone walks in one of our education centers around, we have 187 locations around the globe, some 20 plus countries. So when a service member walks into a place in Tokyo, they can often see a military spouse or another military member or someone who's gone through that same type of experience. When we do our designing, we try to make sure that we have feedback that helps us understand what are these students looking at when they first walk in the door? What are the policies that are going to affect them? So wherever we can, we have advisory boards and student feedback loops, and also workforce loops that allow us to do those types of things and make sure that we are designing for the population we intend to serve and that they are part of that conversation from the beginning.
Yeah. So I guess making sure that they encounter others who have similar lived experiences they do is one of the key ways that you make sure that they understand that, there's a place for them, even if they're not familiar with all of the services and opportunities you've created, because while they're on the outside, they wouldn't necessarily know about that, but they can see those stories and which you're elevating.
Absolutely. And one of the things we hear a lot, particularly for our military students, so we have, give or take, about 55,000 military affiliated students around the globe. And one of the things our students often ask us about is if I get a permanent change station, or if I get deployed in the middle of the class, or if for some reason I'm not able to turn on an assignment because there's been something that came up overnight and I turn to a faculty member or my student success coach or my military education coordinator, are they going to understand my circumstance? And are they going to work with me to make sure that those things are taken care of? If I'm having challenges on the job and for some reason I need an extension on a paper, is the faculty member going to be a sink or swim faculty member, or one that's going to try to say, I'm here to help you, so let me understand the things you're going through? We try to make sure that all of our team are trained and committed to the idea of meeting students where they are. And that's not just a phrase that really does matter to a student who's going through something particularly heavy in their lives at the time.
Yeah. So when you talk about meeting folks where they are, obviously the environment is evolving. And so where people are, you have to constantly stay updated to that. And then, I don't know, for many of us, when we think about institutions of higher education, we probably think about bureaucracy and, old buildings, like physical and non-physical things that sort of indicate that maybe things move a little bit more slowly. And so
Yeah.
how do you get an organization that is large and that in many ways is designed to, it's designed to move slowly for some good reasons, right? In terms of, research and how you approach knowledge, to adapt so that it can meet changing needs, meet people where they are.
You spend a lot of time, I think, trying to make sure, and this is one of the reasons we have what we call practitioner faculty. Or as one of my colleagues once called them, they're both practitioners and academics, so he calls them pracademic. But we try to make sure that when we are bringing people onto the team, they are members of the work. One of the joys is being able to say, hey, if you're going into legal studies, we have people who are on the federal bench who are doing instruction for the class. If you're getting ready to go into a science lab, we've got people who are chief scientists at places like NASA who may be actually a part of the conversation and able to tell you, here's what this is like. And they're also bringing that experience into the classroom in such a way that we're talking real-time understanding of what the students are going to have to need, what the skills are. A lot of this really is about what I call the knowledge, skills, abilities, and disposition you're going to need to be able to succeed in life, KSAT. And being able to clearly define those and being able to clearly articulate those for students solves that sort of big question that we often talk about when it comes to higher education, which is the large conversation in the country right now is around, is higher education really worth it? And part of the reason people are asking that question is because we haven't always been transparent and intentional in telling people step by step, what are the skills they're going to acquire? How does this experience relate to where I'm trying to get to in my life? What's the relevance to each individual assessment that I'm trying to take? And we're trying to do a much better job of saying, to get to this point, we're going to start you up this stepping process that's going, and here's what the skills are that you're going to get today. Here are those going to stack into the next set of skills you're going to need. And here's how that ties to the job description that you've been looking at, want to get the job from. So that intentionality and transparency really does make a difference for people because it shows an accountability that we don't always see people feeling like they have when they're looking at a curriculum or a course catalog.
Yeah. Well, you raised that question that people are asking about, what's the value of higher education? Obviously, that's going across the whole market right now. And so it's something that you have to keep in mind. But then specifically, you have to demonstrate the value of a UMGC education. And to be able to do that, you have to influence students, you have to influence parents, you have to influence employers, and on and on. What have you learned about breaking through to all of these different stakeholders and influencing them, especially during such a dynamic time?
So I go back to something my mom always said when I was growing up. God gave you 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth for a reason. And the way to influence is to be a very good listener and to take into consideration what those various stakeholders are telling us. So if I want the employers to listen to me and believe what I'm talking about, then I've got to have an understanding of what are really your needs. And sometimes it's true that they haven't been asked that question until the extent where they are clear about what they need exactly as well. But we've got to bring them into the conversation. We try to make sure we have plenty of student groups. One of the things that we spend a lot of time with are people who are what we call user experience people. They are very much tied to the conversation in a way that says, do I understand what the user is going through? One thing I didn't talk about in my bio is that my first job when I was in college was at Six Flags over Georgia. And I learned a lot of things at Six Flags. So I didn't realize I was learning them at the time, but as I've grown older and reflected back on what I've learned, Six Flags played a big role in that. And one of the things we did at Six Flags was every part of the experience was not simply there by accident. It had to be an intentional design. So from the moment you decide we're going to bring in a new roller coaster, or we're going to place a new show, or we're going to add a new restaurant, when people walk through the front gate, what do they see? Where are they going to go? All of that stuff is intentionally designed in a way that people don't always see, but it's very much thought about when people are putting that together. we try to do that with every aspect of our experience. Well, so from the moment someone hears about us, when they pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm interested in UMGC, what's our message back to them? What are the 10 questions we get asked the most? How do we tend to address those types of things? For the different populations we're trying to serve, what are their different types of needs? So everybody isn't here for a college degree. You got a lot of students who are coming through because they want a shorter credential, because they want to get that next job, or they want to get a raise. As we're talking about the rapid changes in technology, I mentioned earlier, these ideas of people who are very much tied to machine learning or artificial intelligence. We got a lot of people saying, I just need to learn enough so that I can either be current in this or so that I can get that next step up. That's a different thing than saying I've got to have a 2-year or 4-year degree. It really is saying I need more skills. And that's why I go back to what I said at the beginning. You've got so many people learning who are beyond the traditional student population that we don't always take into consideration. If all I've got for you is a 4-year degree and you don't have 4 years, or you can't come to a campus because you don't have the time to drive around the Beltway here in DC, then I'm going to lose you. And for us to be able to find new ways to do that is critical for more of those students and those businesses to have success.
Yeah, what you're saying about putting people at the center, the user experience, and sort of that thread that you've seen all the way back to Six Flags and the work that you've done with many leading universities. It's such a good reminder, I think, for any leader, whether they're leading a large organization, a small organization, nonprofit, private sector, public sector. We really have to take a step back sometimes and ask ourselves, wait a minute, are we doing this because it puts our brand at the center, or it's the way we've always done things? Or are we seeing what the changing needs of people are and meeting them where they are? And it wasn't that long ago, I would guess, that most colleges and universities thought about themselves and their brands as a place, a campus. It was like, you have to come here. And if you don't come here, we don't have anything for you. And now, obviously, probably, some might still have that mentality, but many have adapted the way that UMGC has to say, that's not what we are. We're not just a place. We're an experience, and you can have that experience. I think you said 187 campuses across the country, the world. I'd love to hear a little. That's not something that's new for you. That point of view at UMGC. That's something that you've been working on for a while. And I wonder if you could take us back to some of your other experiences in higher ed, maybe at Western Governors as a starting point, because I think there are a lot of leaders who could learn from that perspective shift that you've been thinking about since way before the pandemic, when some people woke up to it.
Sure. And it's interesting when people talk about being people-centric, because sometimes you're talking students, but as you said, you're sometimes talking customers of different types of businesses. There is a perception that means that we are all focused on the customer or the learner. That's one way of being people-centric. I still think that's a bit of an ego drive for people because it's all of us looking at you, as opposed to me placing myself in the shoes of the customer or the student and looking out. What do they see? And that's one of the things I've had to say even when I started here, which was when we send out a letter, this isn't about us simply portraying information. When someone reads that letter, what are they going to think or feel or hear? It's from that. Is it something that reflects who we want to be? Not, oh, we told them the truth. Because sometimes I see regulatory things here and I go, well, you told them what the policy was, but that really wasn't the question they were trying to get answered. How do we actually, approach this in a way that says, no, we're still here and we're still true to who we want to be? And this started, certainly it was back at Western Governors. So I said it even started a little earlier for me when I was thinking about my first book, right, was over to Germany. And at the time, they were getting ready to start thinking about Germany during the time was going through the beginning of what the next level of EU reunification meant. So the changing of currency, but also when it came to education, how do you take all these different places? Because unlike the U.S., where 50 states sort of have similar systems, each of those countries had different types of educational programs. And they were trying to think of how do you bring all of these into such a way that someone can go to school in Italy or France or Spain or Belgium and still go across these things and have some type of common understanding of what they're getting. And it required people to really take a step back and go, what's important? How are we defining it? Are we really doing it? And the Bologna course, part of what they were trying to do with that is carry that to the next level. So when I came back from there, I was really starting to think more about you have 4,000 schools in this country, but are there certain things that should be common? And are there things, is it really true that if I take an intro to psych course from a community college, that it's going to be that different from an intro to psych course at an Ivy League school? And why? Shouldn't both of those intro to psych courses have a clarity around what are the skills you're going to have at the end of it? And the more I thought about it, the more I became interested in this conversation. So when I got a call from Western Governors was founded in 1995 or so, and the two governors, Roy Romer of Colorado, Mike Levitt of Utah, were talking about the fact that the businesses in their state were talking about students were graduating from colleges, but they weren't able to demonstrate the skills they needed to have. Again, going back to that, do you actually serve the purpose you're trying to have? And so it really gave us an opportunity to sort of take a step back and go, not so much about what the curriculum said, but how were these things happening and how do we know what we know and what we're doing is being effective? And so the competency-based model that started with WG was about, look, we don't really care where you learned it. What we care about is that you actually have demonstrated skill. So the big part of that was really around whether you learned it. And I say this a lot, even when I was a college professor, I really never knew where people learned things. I would like to think, and I certainly heard from people that, you're a great instructor. We love having you in your class. But, there could be plenty of students in that class who liked my lectures, who liked the engagement of the workshops. But I guarantee you a lot of them also learned it in study group. The learning itself, or they learned it through other types of resources that they had at their hands. When I started doing my master's program, some of the things I was working on, I learned through videotapes and other programs. When people learn things now, I can guarantee you that most people, you ask them where they learn things now, it's going to be YouTube or Google or these places. I use it all the time right now. Hey, I need to learn this thing. I'm not about to go back to school for a degree, nor am I about to go back for even a class. I need to know how to do this thing for the house. What does YouTube have on there? So
Yeah.
imagine thinking about learning as the currency, and beginning to say, okay, did they learn it or did they not? And so Western governors gave me an opportunity to really sit down and think about that, certainly in professional areas like STEM, but also in areas like the humanities and social science. What do competencies look like in these areas? And you see that part of the conversation coming up a lot right now because everybody's talking about, will AI replace human beings? Well, in a lot of ways, what artificial intelligence is doing is actually making that much more clear what the value of human beings are so that we can talk about what the science can do and what the human approach to things is going to be. So I've learned a lot about trying to be able to do those sorts of things. And WGU was the start of that. Certainly, when I got to Southern New Hampshire University, we were talking a lot about how do we do that on a national scale in a lot of different ways as well. And that's certainly carried over to here at UMGC, where all of a sudden I'm dealing with a very large military population and people who are going to be mobile all the time. You may start in Texas, but you may end up, in Tokyo or Naples. When I just finished our global world tour of graduations, and what's always funny to me is that whenever I talk to students, almost none of them finish their degree where they started their degree because the military required them to move. Now imagine what that's like for non-military people, because there are plenty of people who are now being mobile around the country, certainly with remote work. There are people who are saying, I want to live in California or Texas or Florida or New York or Massachusetts or Maryland. And being able to say, it doesn't really matter where you go, we can still help you with the learning and the skills you're going to need for the rest of your life. So that's really sort of the path I've been on, and trying to think intentionally about it is something that's been a big part of that as well.
Well, what you were just saying about that experience, it certainly makes UMGC more attractive if they know they might move, to say, oh, well, I'm not going to be an outlier and one of the only people who, because it's something that you've sort of created an experience for thousands of people who might relocate and are able to continue their education.
Well, I think that's true. And there's also what we talked about as the 40 million Americans who have some college and no degree. I have a lot of conversations with people who, for any number of reasons, there are lots of people who started a college degree and didn't finish it and are still trying to figure out how to do so. And we're trying to, and they may or may not even still be in the same location that they were when they started their degree. Many of them are not, particularly if they came from one part of the country and are now living in another. They're not about to move back across the country to go to a residential campus experience just to finish that degree. So one of the things that we try to offer and make sure we partner with people on is, are there ways that we can continue the skills you've been building back ultimately into that degree, if that's what you want? Or if you don't necessarily need a degree, can we at least help you get those skill sets and know that wherever you go around the country, we're still able to provide that experience? And that's something that you're seeing more and more schools engage in. We were talking a little while ago about space. And I was just reading that article a couple of months ago that said about 54% of students now take at least one online course, wherever you're going to school. And that's going to continue to be the new reality that we're going to be working with. And we can actually do these sort of tuck our heads and sand approach to this, or we can say, how do we make that the most effective experience? When I talk to my team here, I remind them that it wasn't like Kodak didn't have, access to digital photography. They just chose not to use it. It
Yeah.
was Blockbuster couldn't have bought Netflix. They just chose not to do it. So how do we as an industry embrace change in technology as opposed to seeing it pass us by and ultimately replace us?
I'd like to kind of go down that a little bit with you. I think many leaders are seeing the exciting opportunities that come from allowing people to work anywhere and reach customers anywhere. At the same time, it means that your competition has expanded in that regard. And when you're targeting one of those 40 million Americans who has some college but doesn't have a degree, and you have great opportunities for them to, become a student at UMGC and complete the degree there, you're not just competing now with their local university down the street. You're competing with lots of other players out there. And some of them might have a really great quality product. Some of them may not have a really great quality product, but they may have good marketing. How do you think about that as a leader, about showing up to compete in this environment where now the competitive landscape has gotten much more crowded, I would assume, just because of that? People can choose a solution that's anywhere.
Well, I think that the two things that I always work in our favor are, one is the intentionality of did you actually design what the persons who were coming to you needed? So I do not believe that success happens by accident. I believe you've got to put in the hard work of making sure that, you've heard me a minute ago, from the moment someone connects with you, is everything they're coming into contact with going to demonstrate the beliefs and the values that you say. And for a lot of students, that big question, we get a lot, and I do mean a lot of students who've gone to at least 3, 4, sometimes 5 or 6 different schools in their lifetimes. And one of the questions that they often ask is, how are you going to be different? What are you going to do that's going to keep me from not having the same result that I've had at these other places?
Mhm.
Being able to talk to them about, look, we're going to, from day one, walk you through this program, that transparency. The example I use a lot is for people who go to the gym, that having a personal trainer can be a big help. Because they lay out a program for you that says, I know you want to run that marathon, but we don't start off by running the marathon. We're going to back the experience in such a way that you're going to ultimately have that skill, but you're not going to have it day one. But we're going to be here every day to make sure that you are. And there are going to be days when you just don't want to do it. One of the things that you have to be very clear with people about is you're not going to get an A on everything unless you're one of those wonderful summa cum laude students. But for most people, failure is part of learning. And what's going to happen the first time you don't succeed on something? How do we respond to that? And if we are living up to our values, it will make a big difference. I say that we have to be like Sherpas on a mountain. We have to be capable. We can't climb the mountain for you, but we can climb it with you. And if we've done our job right, we've been able to climb that mountain before. So we know basically the obstacles you're going to come into, and we will design an experience that will help you get to the top of that mountain by watching you. So going back to the idea of student-centric or customer-centric, being able to say, hey, these people need to go a little faster or a little slower. That person's suffering from altitude sickness. We need to adjust. That real-time ability to see what's happening is going to be critically important. And this is certainly true in education, but you're seeing this also in almost any other business in America right now. Real-time understanding of what people are choosing and selecting. A lot of the machine learning that you're seeing is really going into algorithms that say, anybody who's gone on a social platform knows that the minute you search one thing, you're going to get 10 different digital ads about it from everybody else. Why? Because they're trying to find out who's our clientele. So the data and the technology will allow us to do things now at scale and in ways that we could not have done before. So I tell my team on a regular basis, we want to create that Doppler radar experience that allows us in real time to see what's happening, all the factors that are coming together that may lead to a rainstorm or may lead to sunshine. But we want to be able to see that in real time and then reach out in real time to help those students move forward.
Yeah. Earlier you referenced your mom, and I wonder if we could just talk about, how your childhood impacted the way that you show up as a leader and an influencer.
Yeah, it is. I tell people all the time that leadership comes from within. Who you are will ultimately manifest itself. And my background is one that it has been manifesting the power of education from day one. So I have 7 brothers and sisters since we just got through Memorial Day not too long ago. So I just got a chance to see them. And my 2 parents, all of us lived in a 2-bedroom house. So literally 10 people, 2 bedrooms. And you can appreciate the fact that we didn't have a lot of space, but my mom was a teacher, secondary, elementary at the time. And she was committed to not only teaching there, she's also my Sunday school teacher, but every day she'd get up and drive 45 minutes from Albany, Georgia to Moultrie, Georgia, to teach those students and then drive home in the evenings and then spend time with us teaching us as well. And so what she believed in was that education can provide a pathway forward. So she insisted on all of us getting good grades. We tended to be a very competitive bunch anyway. So all of us very much took pride in, who's going to get the better grades, who's going to get involved in the most social activity. But as you look at each of my 7 brothers and sisters, each one of those who wanted to get a college degree did. And I've seen each one of them transform their lives and the lives of their families as a result of that. And so when I'm talking to students, I can talk about the idea of, look, you do not have to come from a big house or have lots of space or have lots of amenities. You can still learn, and that learning will open new doors for you if you allow it to. So I think about that a lot when I'm working with students, and certainly around graduation time when I see full families come through with people who have had to make those sacrifices. It is a team sport. It is not just the person who's studying. It's the people who are watching the kids while they're studying, the people who are making the other sacrifices. It's the sacrifices that families make in general that I think are so critical. But if they do those things, then they all reap the benefits of it. And ultimately, it ripples out, right? It's not just the person, it's not just the family, it's the community. And ultimately, the larger community around them. So I often believe that what Nelson Mandela said about education being the greatest weapon with which you can change the world is right. We can do that if we have that sort of approach. And my family plays a big role in my experience and certainly my perspective on what it is possible to do.
And I think you told me before your mom was one of those people who defended those whose voices weren't being heard. Is that right?
Oh yes, my mom was one of those people. She wouldn't miss a PTA meeting unless she had to, and she certainly was up at the school any given time that she thought that her kids were not being treated right. And there were several times with my sisters, we just talked about this weekend, where they recall my mom getting into encounters with the administration of the school. In fact, one of my mom got so frustrated once with she didn't believe her my baby sister was being treated right that she pulled her out of the school and took her and moved her with her to Moultrie, Georgia, where she was teaching at the time, so she could keep an eye on what was happening with her. And ultimately, my sister became a star student in her own way as well. But she was a very big commitment. She had a very big commitment to this idea of it's not just the student, it's not just the teacher, it's the whole administration and how they treat the student that's going to matter. So she knew the principals by first name, and she was not afraid to call them on the phone when she needed to.
Maybe being an administrator, you've encountered similar moms.
Oh, absolutely. And it is, there are just, and it really does matter. Our graduation here the one we just had, our grad walk here in Delphi, it was on Mother's Day. So it's a 4-day event, but the last day was on Mother's Day. And we have lots of signs right here that people get to take pictures of in front of them that talk about Happy Mother's Day. But you see the pride of the moms and their daughters. But what's even more impressive is when you see the pride of the daughters and their mothers and grandmothers, because in many cases, we have multi-generational families graduating together. So it's one thing to say, yes, I'm the mom watching my 25, 28, 30-year-old daughter graduate. It's a whole different thing when you've got a 17-year-old watching their 85-year-old grandmother walk across the stage. And many of them will say, I'm trying to set the example of the power of education and what it can do so that if I can do it, they know that they can do that. And that's true, not just for moms, but obviously for dads and brothers and sons as well. So it's a beautiful thing to be able to say this ripples outward, and it's a powerful thing for us to be able to take part in.
Yeah, that is really cool to see that multi-generational. I love that. I want to switch gears for a second and ask you about social media. Last year, you decided to join Instagram. You also have a presence on LinkedIn. Can you share just about your perspective as a leader, why you have decided that you should have a personal presence on social media? I think a lot of leaders are grappling with that, feeling pressure, not knowing the right approach. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your thought process.
Sure. And I will be the first to say I'm not personally so much interested in putting my personal life out there on things like Instagram or social media, but I do recognize that there's a certain element of personality and person that's important for people to know that you participated in these types of things, that you are speaking from experience yourself. So things you're going to see on Instagram from me are generally going to be the celebrations of our students, the celebrations of the work we are trying to do. And I put that out there and these stories of students who have been successful because I want more people to know they can as well. I go back to 40 million students who have some college but no degree. And there are another 40 million Americans who have no post-secondary skill set documented in a way that they can get used as a credential. A lot of them are trying to figure out what's my path forward, and seeing people like them, seeing people do things that reflect what they want to do is critically important if you're going to try to inspire other people to, get their experiences and change their lives as well. So this is really how we try to use social media as a celebration of the experiences and, celebrating for the people who've gone through it, that they've done it, because that's absolutely important, but also celebrating the people who believe that they can. And for many people, those who've been told that they can't, giving them an opportunity. Nope, that person was just like you, or that person has gone through even more things than you do. It's always interesting to me what ends up motivating a person. You'll have someone, and I remember when I was at one of my previous jobs, we had someone in the middle of Hurricane Katrina lose everything. They've been studying and had lost all of their books, their electricity, their computer. But somehow they worked very, very hard they've been working in a study community, and they were able to reassemble all the work they'd done and get through the semester and ultimately graduate. And then you'll have someone who gets a flat tire and gives up. And you don't know where that person is, what the trigger is for that. So putting as many different stories out there in social media, putting as many different viewpoints out there allows for as many different people as we believe we can reach to hopefully say, you can do this. We are here for you. And going back to that idea of what are we doing that's different, letting them know that we aren't expecting you to come in here necessarily and be the top student in the class from day one. But we are expecting you to come in and put in the time, put in the work, and we will do the same for you. Again, going up that mountain, we'll walk hand in hand with you, but you still got to climb it.
Well, it kind of goes back to something you said earlier about, if you're a member of the military in Tokyo and just seeing that somebody else has had an experience and that you're meeting them where they are. Social media gives you another dimension to connect with people and show them. And on Instagram in particular, you're elevating stories of real students, but from, your bully pulpit as president, so that others can see that and relate to those and celebrate along with you.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think is particularly when we're talking about our military students, seeing their fellow officers or colleagues do it makes a big difference. We do a lot of cohort classes overseas, meaning that one student will say, hey, we are all in this unit and we can come take this one class. You can do a class during lunch on X or Y. Project management could be a big deal. So project management or HR or some of the other things we're trying to do. They want to do it together because they can get them through the experience together, but also seeing their sergeant major or their colonel or an officer who's done it and is witness to that experience makes a difference to them. Seeing a spouse do it. It's one of the things that we see a lot of. I'm always happy when I see a husband and wife combination or two partners and a combination that move forward together. Say, we did this as a couple. Trying to do it that way makes a big difference. So anytime when we can put that message out there, the hardest part for most people really is they don't know how they're going to do it, because all they see, going back to the beginning of our conversation, is this is what college is. Or they lived through an experience during the pandemic that was not necessarily the best online experience. And I tell people, you can't take what people were doing as a risk mitigation strategy during the pandemic and see that as the best version of online education. That was people trying to learn how to swim during a flood. They aren't going to ever be Olympic swimmers. Their job is to try to stay alive and survive. So they put out there what they could. But that's a very different thing than the intentional design and ecosystem that we put out there for our students on every front to make sure that not only are we surrounding the student with support, but that we're seeing the world through that student's eyes.
Dr. Fowler, if we had, a crystal ball and I could ask you, so where do you think higher education is going to be in the next 20, 25 years? It occurs to me that it's not just going to happen by itself, but leaders like you are going to shape what that future looks like. So I wonder, where do you see things going? But maybe even more importantly, how do you influence others to see that vision with you so that they can come along with the decisions you're making to sort of pave that road?
Well, I think you have to go back to, we were talking earlier about, do people understand what college is? You're not talking the same product or the same audience when you're saying the term college across the board. The Ivy League schools will continue to do what the Ivy League schools do. It has great value. And they, have a very competitive marketplace for it. So, 10, 15, 20 years out, I suspect that Harvard and Yale and the schools in that category will be fine. We also need schools that are going to continue to add new knowledge to the environment. So the research institutions, certainly the flagship institutions, I suspect that they will continue to integrate new technologies and pieces into it. But their work of providing new knowledge and providing new scholars who are going to contribute to that will continue as well. It's really that tier that sort of right below that, particularly regional universities, that I think are really going to have to think about what they do and how they do, because as we're talking about the 18-year-old market, if you're taking a look at demographics, people like Nathan Graw and others who study this type of stuff say, not really hard to talk about the fact that all you got to do is go back 18 years to see what the likely population is. And when their birth rates are down, and other things are down, then it's going to be likely that in many parts of the country, particularly places like New England, you're not going to have a whole lot of people going to those experiences. So what are they going to provide? Are they going to be able to do so in good fashion? So that group and what learning looks like is where I think there will be a lot of change. And I think that the non-traditional group will take a bigger slice of the pie overall, but they won't be going for 4-year degrees. I continue to believe that as we move forward, technology and skill sets are changing so rapidly. And if you're trying to develop a curriculum in a traditional school, you're talking by the time you get it out the door, it's already obsolete. So I think that learning is going to become much more chunked, and much more like going to school for a period of time, or there will also be something that we're diving into, which is how do we begin to tag learning experiences in your workplace so that the credential goes as well. So when we're working with businesses and they come to us and say, we want you to create this experience. So we're talking more and more about, can we do this with them at work? Are there people who can evaluate them? So you want them to have a skill set and deal with diverse population. Is that part of their annual review? Is there somebody who's evaluating them at work? Can we take that experience and find ways to integrate this into the workforce so that it's both more current and more appropriate to what they're trying to do? So I think there are going to be more and more ways for people to assess and credential that you have skills. I don't know that it's necessarily going to be equated with what college considers itself to be right now, but the learning is only going to become more so. As with music, I tell people all the time, remember, you used to be able to buy compact disc. Then you could eventually start streaming music. And now you have compact discs are gone, but more people listen to music in different ways now than have ever in the history of mankind. I suspect that more people get news now than ever have in the history of mankind, but they don't buy newspapers. I think that more people will be getting learning in different ways and in different chunks 15 years from now than have done so before. But it won't be necessarily the residential college experience or even necessarily a degree or program, but it will be in these things that fit their lives and certainly are appropriate for whatever circumstance they're currently at.
Wow, that's really, really great way of putting it. And it really makes me think that the demand for the traditional product is softening, but the demand for what's at the core, which is learning, is higher than ever, because especially right now, things are changing so quickly. If people don't learn, they're going to be behind really fast. So innovating and adapting new ways to deliver on that demand is going to be that's what institutions of higher education and employers and everyone's going to have to be able to do.
Well, that goes back to your very first question, which what is traditional and non-traditional? And more you're finding, what is a traditional news watcher now? What is a traditional music purchaser now? I don't think that those things I don't think you say that there are somebody who you find sitting at Tower Records or Circuit City wandering through the phonographs anymore. I don't think at all, but there is something that is now the experience in those areas. And the more we think about what it is we are trying to accomplish, as opposed to what are the ways it's always been done,
Yeah.
the we're going to be as an industry. And I think that's true not just in education, but across many different industries.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just lastly, I would just love to ask you, I mean, this has been such a great conversation. I'm curious where you have found inspiration that helps you figure out how to influence others, outside of higher education and the places we would expect that you have found.
I continue to always be rooted in my family. And I'm the seventh of eight kids, so I have six older brothers and sisters. And my mom also used to say, you can watch. I have four older brothers there. She used always said, you can watch them and not repeat their mistakes. You'll make your own, but you don't have to repeat theirs. So I certainly would say it's rooted in family. But I think the thing that really inspires me, and it may sound slightly cheesy, but it really is graduation. Watching all of these students who graduate go across the stage or come up and meet you. It is literally last week at 15,000 graduates. And as I don't spend very much time, trying to be on the stage. I really try to spend as much time as I can meeting the families. I personally am an introvert, but during graduation time, every single second I can spend with people really does energize me. It's one of the few times where at the end of the day, I just go home inspired to keep doing more of this because it really does make a difference. And you can see how it's going to impact people as they continue to move forward. So when you've got work that you really love, I don't know that it's really work. I always tell people, if you can find that sort of happy spot where your skill, your passion, and the demand in the workforce all intersect, then you're probably going to be happy. And this is one of those things that really does make a difference for me. And I love being able to say, we're leaving something that will ripple far past people who will never know our names.
I love that. And, as we heard from you before, you've traveled around the globe to attend many of these graduations. The vast majority of your students fit into what we would call non-traditional. They're not residential on campus. They're not between 18 and 22. They may be finishing a program they started elsewhere. And I can imagine it must be educational and invigorating and energizing to have that human connection with so many of them and reinforces what you're doing, which is, delivering learning to people who I'm sure a lot of them probably thought this wasn't for them, as we sort of started out with, right? They might have felt like they were outsiders and they missed their age window or whatever, can't live on campus. But you all are growing and expanding and finding ways to deliver learning for all of these folks. And it's exciting to hear about. I appreciate you sharing the background of how you got there and the different experiences that you brought from your family, all your siblings, your mom, and the power of education, and then the many educational experiences that you've had as a student and as a leader in higher education. Incredible interview. And we're really proud to call you a chief influencer. And thank you for spending time with us today and sharing your story.
Thank you for the opportunity. And to anybody there who's listening, who's thinking about going back to finish some skill set, you can do it. Get it done. We are certainly here to help, but wherever you're trying to go, feel free to actually reach out for help because there's so many different opportunities and ways out there, and it really can change your life. So thanks for the opportunity to have a conversation.
Absolutely. And we'll share the link to UMGC in the show notes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Chief Influencer, a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board. If you know a leader who should be featured as a chief influencer, please nominate them at chiefinfluencer.org. For show notes and more, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn. Until next time,